I was rewatching Jacques Rivette's La Belle Noiseuse the other day, and I came to a realization that should be pretty obvious, really, which is that the film is all about people looking at things, looking at other people, looking at works of art. It's a film composed of gazes. So much of the characters' interpersonal dynamics and so much of the individual scene's tension is created by and communicated through these discrete glances, which can easily go unnoticed by the viewer, considering that Rivette very rarely uses close-ups and often frames his characters all together in wide shots, where these looks can get lost in the background. But once you notice them, you realize that these gazes constitute an integral aspect of the film's visual strategy. And this makes sense when we listen to what Rivette has to say in this interview, where he compares film and theatre and talks about what distinguishes one from the other. He says that the voice is one of the two things that theatre and cinema share and that gives presence to the actor. And the other is le regard, the look, the gaze. In cinema, it's the look that is crucial. If you've watched a lot of Rivette films, you'll have noticed that he's a filmmaker who loves to use his actors' bodies as a means of creating dynamic movement across the frame, almost like a dance. Especially in films like Duel and Norrois, where it's the inscription of the actor's body in the image, their movements and gestures, that tell the story. In fact, we might even say that there is no other story than this kind of exquisite choreography. This, of course, is still the case in La Belle Noiseuse, but here I feel like the main vector of movement within the image is the character's line of sight. The eyes of the viewer are brought to navigate through this complex web of relationships via the medium of these looks. For Rivette, the actor's gaze is what gives them presence. It is through what the actor sees, what they are interested in, and how they look at it, that they become real. Because the gaze creates a dynamic between them and the other characters and the world around them. And these looks raise questions. What are they looking at? Why? And more importantly, what are they looking for? This film can be seen as a series of anticipations and satisfactions of the gaze of the characters but also the audience. First, we have Marianne and Nicolas' arrival at Frenofer's house, where they anticipate finally meeting the great master and find themselves waiting a while, as he had clearly forgotten that they were coming. But once he finally shows up, there's then the build-up of anticipation before seeing Frenofer's studio and his most recent works. And then, of course, after the mention of the unfinished masterpiece La Belle Noiseuse, there's the anticipation of seeing that. An anticipation that will never be satisfied, of course, because even in the end, after the characters and the audience have experienced the entire film impatiently awaiting the final product of Frenofer and Marianne's collaboration, we never actually see the real Noiseuse, only a fake, a substitute. So the film ends with one last frustration of the gaze, we might say. And yet, despite not showing it explicitly, the film does make it quite clear what exactly it is that Frenofer decided to depict in the painting. And the answer can be found in one of those many looks found throughout the film, the most important of them all.
Attendez, je vais vous le mettre. Je vous ai dit non! J'en ai marre que vous me tourniez autour. Je suis pas une poupée.
We understand that this is the scene Frenofer chooses to depict in the painting when he attempts to recreate the same pose later on in the studio with Marianne, and she says this.
Vous cherchez quelque chose. Quelque chose que vous avez vu?
So really it couldn't be made any clearer that this is the moment he chose. But why this moment? Why would Frenofer choose this pose specifically as the subject of his great masterpiece? Well, to answer that question, we first have to understand Marianne as a character and the evolution of her relationship with Frenofer throughout the film. The first time we see Marianne, she's performing a role. She's wearing a mask for the two women on the terrace, but also for the audience who, at first, isn't quite sure what her relationship with the young man actually is. After that, she's then placed into this very awkward position of modelling for Frenofer, submitting herself to his gaze. Once again, her true self is not really apparent, despite the fact that this is precisely what Frenofer says he wants to capture in the painting. That's why he tells her to defend herself. The film is all about this back and forth between the two, this tension. But this is not a simple tension between artist and model. Rivette's thematic game goes much deeper than that. Similarly to the implicit conflict between theatre and film in La Bande des Quatre, here once again Rivette has designed the film around two poles, two opposing artistic forms. This time it's film and painting. An art of movement in time and an art of stillness, an art of the fixed moment. So as much as the film can be read as a kind of allegorical dialogue between the artist and the world or object he is mimetically representing, in other words between the artist and the reluctant muse, the film can also be read as an allegorical dialogue between two mediums.
Regardez-moi, en face. La seule chose que vous ayez oublié de faire. Aidez-moi.
Attention.
La façon dont vous travaillez d'habitude, ça vous regarde. Laissez-moi être un peu comme je suis.
Attention.
Laissez-moi trouver ma place, mon mouvement, mon temps.
Marianne's phrasing here is interesting because it suggests that Marianne's form of liberation, her way of imposing her own freedom, is found in motion, in time, which is to say, in film rather than in painting. And so then we get this long shot of Frenofer attempting to capture the essence of what he's seeing while Marianne refuses to stay still, with the scene culminating in a comedic role reversal when Frenofer falls off his stool and frantically asks Marianne to tell him where he was standing exactly before he fell because he had found a great angle, creating a dynamic where Marianne is now the one telling him where to go, where to stand. In a situation where the essence of what is to be painted is movement itself, the refusal to remain fixed in time, then the painter loses his footing. He is no longer in his own domain. He has entered a new world, a new medium. Frenofer's process is one of discovering the Noiseuse within Marianne, a work of art that he apparently failed to find in his partner and previous muse Liz. And it's quite strange when we think about it actually. Why would two completely different portraits of two completely different people have the same name? Why would he even conceive of this as a continuation of that old project? It's almost as if Frenofer believes that La Belle Noiseuse is actually out there somewhere, that it exists as some kind of essence or platonic ideal that doesn't depend on the model, the particular subject. Whatever it is, it can be reached through any medium. And this process raises all sorts of questions about creation and inspiration. We know of artists like Michelangelo who said that the sculpture was already complete within the marble block before he started his work. It was already there, he just had to chisel away at the superfluous material. Artists who have this vision, this idea, that the finished work already exists in the matter, their job is just to draw it out. It's not really coming from them, it's coming from the world itself. For Frenofer, it almost seems like instead of seeing the beauty of what is right in front of him, he's always in search of something else, something just out of reach. The model is just a medium through which he looks for the Noiseuse, and Liz was not a good enough medium, or at least Frenofer did not want to jeopardize their relationship by using her as the medium. Naturally, the first few days of work with Marianne go nowhere because he can't find Marianne's true nature by himself, by forcing her into all of these different poses, hoping that something might be revealed. There needs to be some kind of dialogue between the two. So it's only when Marianne takes control, when she starts defending herself as Frenofert told her to, it's only then that he actually starts seeing her as a person rather than as a conduit. And naturally, it's only then that the painting comes to life and he decides to paint over the old version that depicted Liz. And this is where we finally understand the significance of the scene between Marianne and Liz. This is the scene Frenofert chooses to depict, or rather this is the only scene Frenofert can depict, the only true scene, the only one that demands to be painted, because it is the ultimate expression of Marianne's refusal to be fixed, modelled. In other words, her refusal to be painted, which of course makes La Belle Noiseuse an inherently paradoxical work of art. Of course, Marianne is upset when she sees the painting, first of all because it's a real moment, an embarrassing moment for both her and Liz, taken from their real life rather than from any one of those artificial poses produced within the studio. But more importantly, because, as she states later on, it's actually her. That's who she really is. Frenofert saw her without her mask. And seeing yourself without a mask from an outside perspective is never pleasant.
Maintenant, Marianne a remis son masque. Ou elle en a pris un autre.
By the end, Marianne is wearing a new mask because while we may have to live our lives wearing some kind of mask, she can never go back to being who she was before. Who she was before she saw her true self reflected back to her in that painting. So even though Frenofert, in what may be seen as an act of kindness, decides not to expose her true face to everyone and instead paints a lesser portrait in which, of course, rather than being exposed, Marianne is turned away. All we see is her back, resulting only in the suggestion of something hidden. Despite this, Marianne has still been changed by seeing the painting herself and going through this whole experience. Throughout the film, we follow her process of liberating herself from the gaze of others and choosing her own path. The film even ends with the ultimate act of liberation, liberation from the gaze of the camera, her last line being simply the word no, complete refusal to even intimate what she may do next after the film ends. She, just like the painting, returns to secrecy.
Ce que Marianne est devenue après, elle ne saurait pas ce soir. Marianne, c'est moi. C'était moi.
And appropriately, the film's final shot ends in motion as Marianne exits the frame, her character refusing to be captured in a fixed image.
On parle Espagne. Barcelone. Montserrat.
And so we never get to see the painting, and in truth we do not need to see it because we've already witnessed the dialectical back and forth, the process that leads to Marianne's liberation, which is precisely what is represented in the painting. By watching the film, we have seen La Belle Noiseuse.